為何世間良緣每多不切，終究美夢成泡影，情天偏偏缺。蒼天外作弄人，情緣常破滅，無奈困於間中掙不脫，想化蝴蝶，衝開萬千結。情緣強縱短時，痛苦不消說，可歌往事留在腦海，夢中紅入血。即使未許白頭，柔情難以絕，情意似水滔滔斬不斷，翻作恨詩，千秋代清說。
Our lesser lights are fragments of the distant sun. We light them, not in feeble imitation, for if across our little flame a single sunbeam falls, it turns into shadow. See the cup with curling flame. Air bathes it and bends its light and shapes it like a petal on a stem. Air is consumed by it, but not possessed. Next Friday, February the 12th, is the beginning of the Chinese New Year, which Chinese people call the Spring Festival. This is a public holiday all through the Chinese cultural world, and a family occasion like Christmas for us, when millions of people visit their parents in their hometown to share a meal. This is the second year when it has been drastically affected by the outbreak of the virus COVID-19. My first reading comes from a forgotten or almost forgotten Chinese genius, Lin Liu. This is what he had to say about our monthly theme at Roslyn Hill, imagination, writing in 1935. Nothing is more striking than the Chinese humanist devotion to the true end of life as they conceive it, and the complete ignoring of all theological and metaphysical fantasies extraneous to it. When our great humanist Confucius was asked about the important question of death, his famous reply was, "How can anyone understand death before understanding life?" The Chinese make rather poor Christian converts, and if they are all to be converted, they should all become Quakers, for that is the only sort of Christianity that the Chinese can understand. Christianity as a way of life can impress the Chinese, but Christian creeds and dogmas will be crushed, not by a superior Confucian logic, but by ordinary Confucian common sense. Buddhism, when absorbed by educated Chinese, becomes nothing but a system of mental hygiene, which is the essence of Sung dynasty philosophy. A certain hard-headedness characterizes the Chinese ideal of Chinese ethics. Even in painting and poetry, there is a sheer, wholehearted, instinctive delight in commonplace life, and imagination is used to show a veil of charm and beauty over this earthly life, rather than to escape from it. And now some music for reflection from our Chinese friend. 'And now a story for grown-ups. 500 years ago, there was a virtuous official in China whose family name was Zhang. He lived far from the capital, but his fame spread throughout the empire and even came to the ears of the emperor himself. In the capital, there was a brilliant young man whose family name was Liu. He had passed top in the imperial examinations and was a martial arts expert, horseman, archer, poet, calligrapher, and artist. But despite all his achievements, people kept saying to him, You are very good. But old Zhang was better. He got so fed up with hearing this that he obtained a letter from the emperor authorizing him to visit Zhang and find out the truth. He set out with a squadron of cavalry, and they rode for many days until they reached the remote valley where Zhang was the local imperial magistrate, what we call a mandarin. They arrived on an autumn afternoon and reached the first village as the peasants were gathering their harvest. Liu saw that it was good and the people were well fed. They fled or flung themselves to the ground when they saw the emperor's banner. But Liu told them to rise and asked, "What do you think of Magistrate Zhang?" "Oh, sir, we're lucky to have such a ruler. He only takes a fair portion of our rice in tax, and when there's a famine, he releases grain from his stores to stop us starving." They rode on and heard the sound of drums and gongs coming up the hill towards them. It was a travelling opera troupe moving on to perform in the next county. "How did you get on with Magistrate Zhang?" Liu asked. "He's a true gentleman of the old school," said their leader. "He housed us in his guest rooms, not the stables, and asked us to perform our best opera. He's a real connoisseur of the theatre." Evening was drawing on as they approached the magistrate's residence, and they overtook an old scholar walking ahead, bringing official documents and carrying his writing brush case hanging from his belt. "What do you think of Magistrate Zhang?" "Well, sir, many people here will tell you how good he is, but he's never done me any favours." His worn sandals and patched cloak bore out his words. "Perhaps you would care to dismount and walk the last few yards with me, and I will warn him that you are coming." When they reached the gate, the old man went in and spoke to the guard. They had quite a long wait until he came out again and said, "Please accept my apologies. Magistrate Zhang is away at the moment, but of course he would invite you in." They went in, stabled their horses, and had an excellent supper in the guest rooms. The old scholar joined Liu, drank tea and chatted before they went to bed. During the next few days, Liu and his companions rode round the county, and everyone they met praised Zhang. But he still didn't appear. The old man said, "I'm afraid Magistrate Zhang is ill and can't join us." As they were chatting one evening, young Liu said, "I believe that old Zhang is hiding because he isn't as virtuous as everyone says. Why don't you catch him and find out? I know that he takes a walk out to the back door of the residence at first light every morning." Next day, Liu and his men hid in the woods outside the back door. A hooded figure appeared and walked slowly up the hill. They jumped out and surrounded him with their bows drawn. Liu tore off the hood, and behold, the old scholar was Zhang. "You're not virtuous at all. You lied and cheated me." Liu drew his sword to cut off the liar's head. "What else could I do?" cried Zhang. "Would you have believed me when I told you I've not done myself any favours?" Liu realized that Zhang had had to deceive him, and from that moment they became friends. Young Liu was appointed to administer a county next to old Zhang's, and as past time, He also became famous for his virtue. They often met to drink wine, composed poems, and remember old days in the capital. And now a prayer for the people of China. Tiandi, ruler of heaven, we petition you on behalf of those who live in earth's middle kingdom, bounded to east and south by seas, to west by high mountains, and to the north by a great wall. Keep from them the earth's disasters, earthquakes, typhoons, and floods, the living world's disasters, famine, plague, and pests, and the human world's disasters, invasion, civil war, and tyranny. May they recover from their pleasant plague and follow the teachings of their ancient sages by living in peace, harmony, and prosperity. And now let's enter a period of silent prayer. The hymn we're about to sing, I wrote more than 20 years ago, but the tune was composed by my friend and sadly no longer with us, David Dawson, who died earlier this year of COVID-19. biggest obstacle to understanding Chinese people and China is the language difference. I've been taking part-time lessons for years, but still find it difficult. Quite early in my studies, I began to translate verses of the Tao Te Ching and had a surprise. Many of the words keep their ancient meanings in modern Chinese, and the verses aren't mystical meditations, but concise epigrams. The name of their traditional author, Lao Zi, just means the old sage, and most modern scholars think that he's mythical. The Chinese tradition is that he lived just before Confucius and they met. By contrast, Confucius was a real person who lived from 551 to 479 before the Common Era, and his direct descendants are living today. As Lin's quotation shows, he was skeptical about the supernatural. Traditional religion in China includes respect for ancestors, and Confucius thought that sons and daughters should respect their parents and create harmony in society. We tend to think of Chinese history as a succession of peaceful dynasties, but this is a mistake. The glorious periods were interspersed with almost equal periods of chaos and strife. Confucius lived in such a period of conflict between small states that recognized a distant emperor as their nominal head, but he had little influence. He extolled family virtue based on harmony for parents, drawing on the tradition of ancestor worship that continues to this day. He regarded women as inferior to men, so wives had to obey their husbands and daughters their father. National harmony would arise from meaningful respect to the emperor. And Confucius looked back to past golden times when legendary emperors ruled well, contrasting them with more recent emperors who had ruled badly. Despite his spiritual skepticism, he emphasized that rulers from the emperor downwards had obligations to their subjects, and even more importantly, must strictly observe traditional sacrifices to heaven. The tradition of respect I illustrated with the story earlier. By contrast, Lao Tzu's teaching emphasized appreciation of the natural world. Taoist sages withdrew from daily interaction with others and followed a path to meditation by clearing the mind of extraneous thoughts and reacting spontaneously to events. Confucius's thinking comes to the fore in peaceful, prosperous times, and Lao Tzu's in bad, confused times. Both religions tended to become fixed over time. Confucianism to rigidly formal rules of social life, Taoism to superstitious magical practice. For example, a search for medicines to gain immortality. Buddhism arrived from India over 2,000 years ago and fulfilled a hunger for spirituality neglected by traditional Chinese religions. Saintly teachers struggled across the Himalayan mountains to reach China. They taught the Mahayana branch of Buddhism. Chinese children love stories about the adventures of the Monkey King, who overcame all kind of monsters to help the monk Sanzang to bring the Mahayana scriptures to the capital of China. I do not believe that Mahayana Buddhism regards incarnations of Gautama Siddhartha as the omnipotent and omniscient God that we're familiar with in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Although Chinese believers offer prayers, incense, and gifts like fruit to Buddha, I would say that they do not regard him, or indeed her, as an incarnation, as omnipotent or omniscient. In the modern People's Republic of China, traditional beliefs have had to survive more than 70 years of communist rule. Mao Zedong rejected belief in the supernatural, and whipped up his supporters to destroy religion during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. Temples, churches, and mosques were smashed and burned by the Red Guards. China is still ruled by the Communist Party, and its members are not supposed to be religious believers. However, the hard-headed realism that Lin Liu described has led to appreciation of some role for religion in Chinese life and culture. Temples have reopened, and there are Buddhist and Taoist monks and nuns. The Kung Fu monks of Shaolin Temple in Hebei province and the Taoist monks of Wudangshan in Hubei province are admired as successful exporters of Chinese culture. Chinese religion thrives among the overseas Chinese communities in Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, and California in the United States, but it adapts to local tastes, like Chinese restaurants. The aphorisms of the Tao Te Ching and the fortune telling of the I Ching can be translated in many different ways, and the English versions that we read reflect the views of translators rather than Chinese religion. I share Lin Liu Tang's view of the humanist roots of Chinese religion and believe that it provides a counterbalance to dogmatic theism and, in China, to dogmatic atheism. The spirituality of China shows us that religious life is possible without dogmatic belief in omniscient and omnipotent God. And my final words were written by my father, Leonard Mason. In China, where the dust of ageless winds has filled the valleys with fertile soil, they remember many dynasties and touch the jade of lovely things. Amen, and so be it.
雪几天晴朗，腊梅处处香，七里八桥过，铃儿响叮当，响叮当，响叮当，响叮当，响叮当。好在的秉公羊，共我书生青云，共度好时光。雪几天晴朗，腊梅处处香，七里八桥过。 响叮当，响叮当，响叮当，响叮。